The wind that rolled across the plains that evening carried dust, the scent of dry wheat, and the sharp edge of pride. In the small town of Red Mesa, pride was currency, and everyone knew the price of losing it. The general store sat at the heart of Main Street like a stubborn relic of better days, its wooden porch creaking beneath boots and gossip alike. Inside, under the yellowed glow of hanging bulbs, Clara Whitmore stood at the counter with her chin lifted high, though her hands trembled around a canvas bag that held nothing but hope. The clerk didn't look her in the eye when he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. Mr. Collins says no more credit." The words weren't loud, but they rang like a church bell in a silent valley. A few men near the stove paused mid-conversation. A woman by the flour sacks lowered her gaze. Clara swallowed, pressing her lips together so tightly they blanched. She had once walked these aisles with coins to spare and laughter to share. That was before her father's passing, before the drought, before the bank took the last strip of their land. Now she stood alone, dignity thin as thread. The door opened behind her with a slow groan of hinges. Boots struck the wood floor in steady rhythm. No one needed to look to know who it was. The air shifted when he entered, like the sky darkening before rain. Caleb Rourke had the kind of presence carved by sun and hardship. His hat shadowed eyes that had seen too much and judged too little. He was known for riding hard and speaking less, for keeping to the edges of town and never lingering where pity might find him. He noticed everything, though, especially injustice. He saw Clara's shoulders stiffen as the clerk turned away. He saw the way her fingers tightened around the empty bag. He heard the silence, the cruelest sound of all. Caleb stepped forward, removing his hat with deliberate calm. "Put it on my tab." The clerk blinked. "Caleb, put it on my tab," he repeated, voice low even, not a request. Clara turned, startled, her blue eyes flashing with equal parts gratitude and defiance. "I don't need charity." He met her gaze steadily. "Good, 'cause that ain't what I'm offering." The store held its breath. Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Ride with me. I'll fill your table tonight." There was something in the way he said it, not flirtation, not pity, but certainty. Like he had already made the decision and was simply inviting her into it. Outside, the sky bled gold and amber across the horizon. Inside, Clara weighed her pride against hunger, her independence against exhaustion. Then, without another word, she lifted her chin and walked past him toward the door. Caleb replaced his hat and followed. The town watched as they rode out together, two silhouettes against the sinking sun. Clara had not ridden in months, yet muscle memory guided her as she settled into the saddle behind Caleb's spare reins. The rhythm of hooves against dirt felt like a heartbeat she had almost forgotten. They rode west, toward land most had given up on. Caleb's ranch lay beyond a dry creek bed and a stretch of scrubland others called useless. But Caleb saw differently. Where others saw drought, he saw resilience. Where others saw dust, he saw seeds waiting for a second chance. "You don't have to do this," Clara called over the wind. "I know," he replied simply. They rode in silence after that, the kind that grows not from discomfort but from understanding. The sun dipped lower, painting the world in firelight. Clara felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, not dependence, not obligation, but the faintest flicker of possibility. When they reached the ranch, she stared in disbelief. Lanterns glowed along the fence posts. Smoke curled from the chimney. The land, though rugged, bore signs of careful tending, rows of late, seasoned vegetables shielded by canvas, a small herd of cattle grazing stubbornly, chickens scratching near a coop patched with loving precision. "You did all this?" she asked softly. Caleb dismounted and offered her a hand. Didn't do it alone. Land helped. Time helped. Refused to quit helped most of all. Inside the modest house, warmth wrapped around her like an embrace. A stew simmered on the stove, thick with beans and venison. Fresh bread cooled on the counter. Clara's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I was going to bring this into town tomorrow," Caleb said. "Figured some folks might need reminding that hard times ain't the end." She turned to him slowly. "Why me?" He held her gaze, unflinching. "Because you stood there like you'd rather starve than beg. That kind of strength deserves backing." Clara hadn't cried in months. Not when the bank took the land. Not when neighbors whispered. But now, standing in a kitchen that smelled of nourishment and hope, tears blurred her vision. Caleb pretended not to notice. Instead, he ladled stew into two bowls and set them at the small wooden table. "Sit," he said gently. "Eat." And she did. Word traveled fast in Red Mesa by morning. Speculation galloped faster than any horse. Some called Clara reckless. Others called Caleb foolish. A few, very few, called it brave. But while the town whispered, something else was happening beyond its borders. Clara returned the next day, not as a damsel rescued, but as a partner determined. She rolled up her sleeves and walked the fields with Caleb, asking questions about irrigation trenches and crop rotation. She studied the way he had redirected runoff from rare rains into underground barrels. She listened as he spoke of soil health like it was a living companion. "You don't look at land the way others do," she observed. He shrugged. "Land ain't just dirt. It remembers how you treat it." The words settled into her like seeds. Days turned into weeks. Clara began drafting plans: small cooperative trade between struggling families, shared harvest schedules, pooled livestock care. Caleb provided the backbone, Clara provided the blueprint. Together, they became something the town hadn't expected: proof. When Caleb rode back into Red Mesa with a wagon full of produce and Clara at his side, the store fell silent once more, but this time, not with judgment, with curiosity. She stepped forward first. "We're opening trade," she announced calmly. "No credit, no debt, work exchanged for food, skills for supplies." Caleb stood beside her, steady as ever. Mr. Collins hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Change doesn't roar into towns like Red Mesa. It creeps in on dusty boots and determined hearts. It arrives in whispers like, 'Ride with me,' and grows into movements no drought can wither." That night, more tables were filled than one, and as lanterns flickered across the plains, Clara realized something profound: she hadn't been rescued. She had been invited. Winter threatened early that year. Dark clouds gathered heavy over Red Mesa, and the temperature dropped with biting intent. For years, cold meant scarcity. But this time felt different. Caleb's ranch had grown, not in size, but in spirit. Where once there were guarded glances, there were now shared tools. Where fences divided, gates opened. Clara stood in the center of the barn one brisk morning, organizing deliveries. Her once delicate hands were now strong, calloused with purpose. She no longer wore the look of someone surviving. She carried the posture of someone building. Still, challenges pressed close. A cattle sickness spread across neighboring counties. Supply trains ran late. Rumors whispered that the bank intended to seize more land come spring. One evening, as wind rattled the shutters, Clara found Caleb leaning against the porch rail, staring at distant lightning.
"You're thinking too loud," she teased gently. He exhaled. "Storm's coming."
"We've weathered worse." He looked at her, something unspoken in his eyes. "Not like this." She stepped beside him. "Then we face it like always. Together." It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was solid. The kind of bond forged not in grand gestures, but in daily choice. The storm hit 3 nights later. Rain came in sheets, relentless and punishing. The dry creek bed roared back to life, threatening to swallow fences whole. Wind tore canvas from crop rows. Livestock panicked, but preparation makes courage practical. Caleb and Clara moved with urgency but not chaos. They had dug trenches deeper weeks before, reinforced barns, stored feed high and dry. Neighbors arrived in the downpour without being asked. Men who once avoided eye contact now hauled sandbags. Women who once whispered behind hands now carried lanterns through mud. Collins stood knee-deep in water, securing posts. The storm raged for hours. Yet by dawn, though battered, the ranch stood. And something else stood too: community. Clara surveyed the damage, mud streaked across her face. "We did it." Caleb nodded, rain dripping from his hat brim.
"You did." She shook her head. "No, we did."
In that moment, it wasn't about one woman denied at a store. It was about a town that refused to deny itself compassion any longer. Spring arrived, hesitant but hopeful. The storm had left behind more than wreckage. It had left behind water in the barrels, richer soil, and a strange kind of unity. Red Mesa changed slowly but permanently. The general store added a trade board. Families rotated labor across properties. Children ran between houses without fear of whispered judgment. And on one golden evening, as the sun dipped low once more, Clara stood outside the store where months ago she had faced humiliation. Caleb approached quietly, boots steady as ever. "Funny," she mused, "how a whisper can change everything." He tilted his head. "Which whisper?" She smiled.
"Ride with me."
He looked out across the town, the fuller tables, the mended fences, the lanterns glowing warm against twilight. "Best ride I ever offered." Clara reached for his hand, not because she needed saving, but because she chose partnership. The plains stretched endless before them, uncertain yet promising. Hardship would return, it always did. But so would resilience. And somewhere, in kitchens once empty, stew simmered. Because one cowboy saw more than denial. He saw potential. And when he whispered, "Ride with me, I'll fill your table tonight," he wasn't just offering a meal. He was offering a future.